So my father was a humble Singapore Chinese immigrant shopkeeper. And in 1987, he dreamed not of living the American dream, but of living the Australian dream, which you can probably tell by my accent. So he bundled my mother, my sister, and I all together, and he moved us to Perth in Western Australia. And there, because he had no education beyond high school, like many immigrants, he bought us a small shop, a news agency. Do you remember in the 90s news agencies, we sold paper and pens and Archie comics, which I loved, Teen Idol magazines. Now, I was very bad at maths. I still am not great. You guys have a lot to teach me about that. So in order for me to be better at maths, my mother would make me shadow my dad in that shop every school holidays and count back change to customers, hoping I would get better. What she didn't count on was the fact that the minute my dad could hear the beads of gravel unfurl themselves around the tires of her car reversing out of that shopping center driveway, my dad would come up to me, he'd tap me on the shoulder. "Hey, darling, it's okay. You can step back." And I would sit on the carpet, cross-legged, with that Archie comic and a Coke from the mini fridge, and read. But like any 9-year-old, 4 hours into the 8-hour day, I would get bored, and then I would look up and watch my dad connect with his customers. Now, this is a guy who literally showed up 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, for 20 years till the day he died of cancer, not making it to his retirement. He showed up and he created human connection magic within the 3D box that he was trapped behind of that shop counter, which is not unlike the box that we have found ourselves trapped behind in virtual communication over the last 2 years. But more on that in a moment. So the first customer would come in, a Malaysian man, a new immigrant to Australia, maybe 4 years. And I would watch as my dad would thicken his Asian accent. He would throw words of Chinese into the conversation, and his body would morph. He would lean casually down at his hips, and his paunch would be over the top of his belt like ripe Christmas pudding covered in white polo shirt. And the two men would debate back and forth, which country, Singapore or Malaysia, had the best laksa. Do you know what laksa is here? It's a delicious noodle dish, and if you're ever in my part of the world, I would take you to have some. And they would debate which country had the best. 30 seconds later, this man would walk out, another man would walk in, a German immigrant, this time 30 years in Australia. My dad's body would change. He would match this man's upright gait. He would neutralize his Asian accent, not to pretend he was posh or something that he wasn't, but to be understood. And the two men would talk about the Eurovision Song Contest. Does anyone know what the Eurovision Song Contest is? Yes, thank you. If you don't know, it's an American Idol-style contest where countries across Europe put forward a song and then one country comes out the winner. It's important for later in the story. 30 seconds later, this German customer would move and a British customer would come in. This man, 45 years in Australia. And here, my dad would go quiet and he wouldn't talk very much and he would just listen. And my 9-year-old jaw dropped because this British man was disclosing not just the everyday, how are you, would you like a packet of cigarettes? He was disclosing his deepest, darkest trauma to his local shopkeeper. He was an orphan from the north of England that was brought over in something called the Home Children's Scheme. And this happened in Canada as well, where these orphans were brought in and went through a lot of neglect and abuse in order to get their residency for the country. And I just thought, what spell had my dad cast over these people that they would feel so comfortable with him? And what that magic was is rapport. Rapport is where other people perceive us to be more like them. And it goes back to the science of human connection. When we were out living on the savannah as early people, as tribes people, our brains quickly acquainted that there was safety in numbers. If we were with our tribe, there was more support. So if we were pregnant and slowing everyone down, the other women in the tribe would gather berries and feed us. If we were out on the hunt and we were injured, the other men in the tribe would spear game, bring it back and feed us. And at night, when we slept, different people would take turns keeping watch to make sure that we got our sleep. To this day, if we are cast out of that tribe, socially distant, lonely, our body has a fight or flight response that undermines our well-being, shortens our lifespan, and leads to a whole host of both mental and physical illness. So human connection is really, really good for us. And when we recognize people from our tribe, we feel closer to them. And that builds trust. Trust is the cornerstone of connection. And now you're all realtors, so you know people buy from people they know, like, and trust. So rapport is the first of 4 building blocks today of human connection that I'll share. And rapport is what we use when we first meet someone, a new contact. I think of it as like tenderizing the meat. Sorry to any vegans here. It's like tenderizing the meat before marination, okay? It's the first step. So how did my dad do it? I'm going to break it down into steps now. The first thing he did was he spoke to people like they spoke to him. So when you meet a brand new prospect, match them in terms of speed, tone, volume. People here bilingual in this room? Anybody bilingual? Great. If you meet a new prospect whose first language is your second language, you can drop some words in like what my dad did. He was in that moment saying to that Malaysian man, hey, I know I've been in Australia 10 years and I'm raising my children here, but hey, my Asian brother, you and I are still part of the same tribe. We're still more alike than you think. So use that. Tap into the volume, the energy somebody speaks at. Speak to them like they speak to you. Point number 2 for building rapport. Speak to people about the things they like to speak about. Remember I mentioned the Eurovision, the song contest? Now that baffled me because my dad would rather talk about golf. He would have loved the win. And also about us kids. He didn't. Why would he be interested in a song contest? Yet every year he would make me stay up late European time with him and sit there as he cracked hot chestnuts into my hand. We would be waiting for the winner of this contest. And it's only as an adult that I realized the stakes for him were so high. He had to make sales to maintain his residency, and having content to connect with his clients with allowed him to make those sales. It would keep the hot chestnut in my hand, the rice bowl in my stomach, and the overpriced private school uniform on my back. So he did it. So speak to people like they speak to you and talk to them about the things that they want to talk about. When you first meet a contact, put aside your desire to talk about the things you're interested in. Let them speak. The third thing that is really important was my father used his body. Now, I mentioned to you, he was pinned, severed at the waist by that countertop like so many immigrant shopkeepers we've all seen. 7 days a week. He didn't get out much, but he made magic with his upper body. And why mirroring is really powerful is when we see somebody move their body the way we move our body, our brain goes, oh, they're like me. We're part of that same tribe. If they express the way that I express, well, we're alike. And that is so powerful in a hugely polarized world when people see themselves in you. So the other reason mirroring is important is to do with trust. Now, trust is part of building connection. And what we know is the first thing that people do when they meet a stranger is they don't glance at their eyes or their mouth. They glance at their hands. Did you know that? Okay, well now we know. Communications expert Vanessa Van Edwards found out that the world's most watched TED Talks are the ones with the most hand gestures. And this is to do with the fact when we were back as tribespeople on that savannah, if we were to come across a stranger from a foreign tribe, the first thing we would do would be, if they had their hands behind their back, as possibly a weapon that could hurt us. It made us trust them less. If I was to do my whole speech to you right now with my hands behind my back, you wouldn't trust me as much. Your subconscious would be like, what is Simone hiding? So we want to build trust, and this is both for in-person and for on virtual. I even heard social media before. I use a lot of video for social media. Having your frame for any virtual conferencing that you have with a potential client in another city maybe, having it framed out and remembering my dad, that counter at the waist, make sure the bottom of your laptop screen touches the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the bit of triangular muscle in between your rib cage. Let's all find that right now. So your ribs are here and there's that little triangle of muscle. For the singers in here, yours is going to be stronger than the rest of us. That is where you should try and line up the bottom of the frame of your laptop so your hands are in shot. If they're under on your lap, it's the equivalent of standing on stage and doing that speech with your hands behind your back. So digital body language, in-person body language, and mirroring that client is really important. So if you were to meet and they look like they had a down day, body posture's not good, you wouldn't meet up with them and be like, hi, I'm here, how are you? It would show that you weren't resonant with where they're at and that you are not alike. We want to be alike, we want to match that body posture at first and then bring them out into good rapport. And naturally good human connectors do this innately, but it's something to be reminded of. So, rapport is our first pillar, and the three things are: speak to people like they speak to you, talk to them about the things they like to speak about, and mirror their body language.